On a cold November morning in 1983, an armed gang stole over £26 million worth of gold. £500 million at today's prices.
The bullion thieves forced their way into the top security depot beneath the Heathrow flight path just after 6 o'clock this morning.
They've just pulled off the gold bullion heist of the century.
The raid was so huge that the price of gold across the world shot up.
That meant the gold they'd stolen had gone up by £1.1 million in value.
The Brinx bullion heist is still the biggest, most notorious armed robbery to ever take place in the UK. It's also one of the most vicious.
They've thrown petrol all over me. They told me, do what you want or we'll burn you alive.
The level of brutality was exceptionally high in the Brinx case.
It unleashed a trail of murder.
People would have to pay up, and people don't want to pay up, and that's why people are dead.
Betrayal.
Greed has kicked in at all levels. Nobody trusts anybody. That turns to violence. That's why some people have been killed.
And revenge that continues to this day.
The message was put across quite clearly. If you steal from us, you will die.
'80s Britain is a turbulent era. The country is plunged into a recession with millions unemployed. Riots spread across the nation's towns and cities, and Britain goes to war in the Falklands. It's a decade overshadowed by violence, particularly when it comes to crime.
I would say the crime in the 80s was violent. All the robberies were committed using firearms. It was part of the robber's kit. And that's what led to the flying squad concentrated entirely on armed robbery.
By far the biggest and most brutal armed robbery of the decade all begins on a wintry Saturday morning at a secure depot near London's Heathrow Airport used by Brinx, a company that specializes in transporting valuable goods around the world.
It's a freezing cold November morning as Michael's scouts open up the Brinx warehouse.
It's the start of the weekend's early shift for the security guards, many of whom are ex-military, because behind the nondescript facade lies one of Britain's most secure storage facilities, containing a reinforced concrete vault protected by 11 locks and 5 alarms. The whole installation can contain millions of pounds worth of cash and valuables on any given day. One security guard there that morning is ex-soldier Robin Risley.
My job is a crew leader. I open all the safes with the combinations. Usually on a Saturday it's a bit laid back because there's only a few of us in, so it's a bit more jovial. We usually go and make a cup of tea, so one of us would put the kettle on, which was Peter Bentley. And then the doorbell rang.
31-year-old Tony Black is the last member of the team to arrive.
Tony Black was late, which he kind of was quite often. That morning, it was normal, you know, including Tony and Michael, Scouse, Peter Bentley, just a normal day at the office.
But this is all about to change.
We're drinking our tea, having a chat, and all of a sudden...
6 masked men, all armed with automatic weapons, storm in.
Because I was in the army, you're trained to do exactly what you're told to do. Get on the floor.
When one of them, Peter Bentley, doesn't react fast enough,
Get down!
he's coshed over the head with a Browning automatic.
It looked to me almost like a military-type operation. All of them seemed to know exactly where they were going and how to do and what to do. After a few minutes of laying there, another one of the guys comes around, puts hoods over our heads, handcuffs our arms around our back, and then used duct tape to fasten our feet together. You're completely restricted and can't see.
It soon becomes clear that the gang know exactly what they're after.
I knew straight away that they're going to want me to open the safes downstairs at some point, because that's why they're here. They asked for Robin, which obviously I said here. They picked me up. They took me into an office where this guy said, right, you're going to open the vaults and you're not going to mess us about.
The vaults in question are both securely locked and alarmed.
Opening the vaults is a two-man job. One person is a key man, the other person is a crew leader. You cannot get into the vaults on your own. You have to have two of you.
The robbers target another guard, Mike Scouse.
Risley and Scouse were crucial because one of them had the combination and the other one had the key. And without those two elements, the robbers could not get to what they wanted.
The gang ensure results through fear.
They've thrown petrol all over me. They told me, you got to do what we want or we'll burn you alive or kill you. And they've taken us down to the vaults.
This is a high security vault. They need a specific code in order to get in to where the money is. They've got through the first door, but they still have the second door before they'll get to what they're after. It's the same situation all over again for that second door.
Now the gang are just one tantalizing step away from their goal.
There are 3 large safes.
Which I have the combination to all 3. One of the guys knew that it was my job to open these 3 safes, and he started badgering me to open them. A few days before, they changed the combination, but I didn't know the numbers off the top of my head.
Despite being a veteran of countless armed conflicts, he's frozen with fear.
So I tried to pretend I knew what I was doing, but actually I didn't have the numbers with me, and I knew we weren't going to get into these safes.
The atmosphere is really tense. Risley knows that not being able to remember that code could cost him his life.
I thought that was the time, if any, this could end nastily.
Armed and incredibly dangerous, the gang are about to make a discovery that will shake them to their very core. It's November 1983, and a highly organized, violent gang of 6 armed robbers has successfully stormed Brinx Mat High Security Depot near Heathrow. Ensuring the cooperation of 2 guards by dousing them in petrol and threatening to burn them alive, the gang have only taken 30 minutes to get to their goal of 3 safes where they hope to find millions. But now the security guard who can get into the safes, Robin Risley, can't remember the combinations, and he's been dragged away fearing for his life.
That was where I felt most vulnerable. I didn't know how that was going to go then.
The gang handcuffed Risley inside a cupboard with fellow crew member Tony Black.
So at that point, it was relief, because I think if they were going to do anything else, they'd have done it and not put you in the cupboard.
Downstairs in the vault, it's looking like the gang are going to have to leave empty-handed until they notice a pallet of drab grey boxes.
They start opening those containers, and then to their utter shock and delight, they see that they're filled with gold.
Incredibly, there are a total of 76 boxes containing 6,800 gold bars, weighing nearly 3 tons, that were waiting to be transported abroad. It's worth over £26 million, which at today's gold prices would be a staggering £500 million. Lee Sturley's family were involved in the robbery.
They didn't realise that there's a big prize to be taken, right? And when they stumbled on it, they decided to just take everything.
Greed kicks in, and they would have thought, we can take this and worry about it later, and that's what Lee did.
Coming across 3 tons of gold rather than the couple of million they were expecting seems like a bonus to the gang. But they have no idea that taking it all is a decision that will haunt them for the rest of their lives.
They've just pulled off the gold bullion heist of the century.
But less than 30 minutes after the gang have left, a member of staff manages to free himself and call the police. An elite Scotland Yard squad is there within half an hour. Bill Miller is one of the first officers on the scene.
On arrival there, I realised that this is going to be the biggest robbery we've ever heard of in Great Britain. The scene was obviously a scene of violence. There was chairs scattered all over the place. And it was obvious that this was a highly skilled professional crime.
It isn't long before a robbery of this magnitude hits the headlines.
The bullion thieves forced their way into the top security depot beneath the Heathrow flight path just after 6 o'clock this morning. The thieves then moved 6,800 bars of pure gold, each one weighing 1 or 2 kilos, about 3 tons in all. The police are not saying how the men got into the depot, whether the security cameras were working, or how they got away.
But police do have a theory how the gang could have pulled this off so efficiently.
Right from the start, we are thinking this is an inside job. Somebody has helped them to get in. You know, they don't just appear in without any sign of breaking to the front door. They must have an inside man working for them.
It's a theory that shocks the rest of the staff.
Been at Brinx for 2 years, and most of my colleagues on that day have been with me pretty much the whole of that time, so we're quite good friends. We just didn't believe that any of the guys that were there that morning could have done it or would have done it.
Officers waste no time in looking into the Brinx staff's movements during the robbery.
Every one of the guards are under suspicion because we don't know who is the rogue among them. The next step is that we're going to reconstruct the crime. We have all the guards into the premises, and we then have each one go through what he remembers of the incident. It was being videoed as we went along.
Police hope the reconstruction will highlight any discrepancies and point to the inside man.
Now, while we were videoing Tony Black, he was asked if he saw the getaway vehicles.
Black says he'd been forced to operate the controls to open the shutters and allow the robber's van into the warehouse during the heist.
From where you were standing, could you see the shutters open?
No, I was looking in the corner like.
So he was asked then to stand in the position which he was when he was opening the doors.
I think I may have even been closer because I was doing it like that rather than like that, so it must have been about here.
He had to stand with his nose right up in the corner, otherwise he must have seen these getaway vehicles. And immediately we all went, hello, here's our rogue man.
Believing they're onto something, police look into Black's background in more detail, and what they uncover is unbelievable.
We discovered that from previous criminal intelligence that he was connected with a well-known armed robber called Brian Robinson. In fact, Tony's sister was living as the common-law wife of Brian Robinson.
The reconstruction's given police their first break, but within 24 hours of Britain's biggest armed robbery, shockwaves are felt all over the world.
And because so much gold had suddenly been stolen and taken off the market, the value of gold in general was going up even faster than usual. And ironically, that meant the gold they'd stolen had gone up by £1.1 million in value.
The gang's unexpected haul may have increased in value, but it doesn't mean much if they can't get rid of it. And back in southeast London, they're having a nightmare.
Stealing the gold was the easy part. It's when you've got to turn it into money, then the problems begin. In the underworld, word's got out to all the criminal fraternity in the area that these people have got a large amount of gold to dispose of and turn it into cash. And that's when the vultures appear.
Because the stolen gold is 100% pure and incredibly rare, it needs to be melted down and disguised before it can be cashed in.
It's not a normal commodity that you can dispose of. I mean, it's a sudden influx of gold onto the market would obviously show up. If you want to try and convert it back into cash, you need to have people who in the industry who are able to do it for you. They didn't have any of that.
With no other option, the gang has to go out of their circle of trust to find criminals who know what to do. Involving outsiders is their second big mistake, and will trigger a spree of murder and mayhem that will stretch over decades.
Any villain who moves in a circle with which he's not familiar is taking a risk, because the people that he normally deals with, he knows them. He might know them from prison, he might know them from growing up in the street with them. So I think that they take a real risk when they go outside of their own familiar territory.
One of the first criminals they go with is a Kent-based gangster and known fence called Kenneth Noy.
The Brinx mat robbers felt that they could approach Kenneth Noy to launder the gold and turn it into money. And they trusted him, which was a very foolish mistake.
Kenny Noy was a guy that played two ends against the middle. He was a manipulator and a wheeler dealer and a thug on top of all that.
I wouldn't trust Kenneth Noy as far as I could see him.
With the gang looking for ways to turn the gold into cash, just a few days after the heist, police are questioning the person they think is the inside man.
Tony Black is sticking to his story. He's an innocent guard, the same as the other ones. And when the name of Brian Robinson is put to him, the change comes over him then. You could see he was now a really worried man. So we leave him alone for a while, let him think over it. And we go back in, and he says, okay, I'll tell you everything.
Black gives police the names of 3 members of the gang, all of them well-known South London criminals. His brother-in-law, Brian the Colonel Robinson, Tony White, and Mad Mickey McAvoy.
Robinson and McAvoy were very, very hard men, right? Ruthless, right? And they'd let nothing stand in their way. These were key players, professional South London firm of armed robbers, and they'd done it before. They was very experienced in what they'd done and carried out the job absolutely perfect.
Tony Black has now admitted that he was part of the plan. He was the one that let them into the premises to commit the robbery. He then made statements under caution, telling us all about the whole setup, how he was recruited to do this.
It turns out the heist was meticulously planned for 9 months.
He would meet with Robinson and McAvoy after he came out of work at night to maybe have a pint with him and discuss it. He was given a camera to take photographs of the inside of the premises, the inside of the vaults. He was an excellent inside man, really, as far as they were concerned.
With the location sorted, they moved on to the next stage.
The plan was that once there was a good haul in there, whichever week it was going to be, he would phone Robinson from the phone, a public phone inside Brinx premises, and he would say, let's go fishing tonight. And that was the signal to hit it the next morning.
News of Black's involvement shocks the rest of the Brinx mat workers.
The first time I heard that Tony Black was the inside man was from one of the other guys. I didn't get told by the police. They said Tony was the inside man, and all of us, without a shadow of a doubt, said that can't be possible. Tony and I were mates. We used to go out for a drink, girlfriends and stuff like that before he got married. And at no point did I think he was the inside man.
Now police have Tony Black's confession. They can make arrests.
We arrest Robinson and McAvoy and White 10 days after the armed robbery. We charge the 3 men with committing armed robbery and conspiracy to rob Brinx Mat Gold Bullion.
Despite 3 of the Brinx Mat gang being behind bars and awaiting trial, the gold is still out there. Then, just 2 weeks after the heist, police get their first major lead into the gold's whereabouts.
In early December 1984, we get a phone call from a man in Hatton Garden, and a gentleman has walked in there wanting to buy a smelter to smelt gold.
It's just the news the police are after, because they know smelting the gold and disguising it is the only way the gang can turn it into cash. Following this lead, they discover the man is connected to none other than Kenneth Noy. In 1983, Tony Curtis is a detective constable on the case and is speaking about it for the first time.
2 or 3 of the people on our team have had an interest in Kenneth Noy virtually from the time when the other robbers were arrested. So this now points us in that direction. So there is a connection there already, or tenuous at the time, but it is a connection that shows us that we may well be in the right direction.
Noy's now in the picture, but with no more to go on, officers have to wait until smelting, disguising and selling so much gold comes to their notice. 3 months after the heist, Tony Black, the Brinx Mat robbery's inside man turned informant, stands trial.
Tony Black has decided to cooperate with the police, and, surprise, surprise, he's been told he will only receive a low sentence as a result.
Black is sentenced to 6 years. Although the deal gets him less prison time, he'll spend the rest of his life in fear.
Black would have been looking over his shoulder 24/7 and worried out of his life, because he'd just put the block on one of the greatest robberies that has ever happened.
It's just over 3 months after Britain's biggest armed robbery, when over £26 million worth of gold bullion was stolen by a gang of 6 vicious robbers from the Brinx Mat depot near Heathrow Airport. Police have managed to arrest 3 of the gang, but they have no idea that the gold has already been entrusted to, amongst others, Kent gangster Kenneth Noy, whose job it is to turn it into cash. But to sell it on the open market, it needs to be smelted, disguised, and somehow have all the legal paperwork. It's not an easy problem to solve. It isn't long, though, before Noy comes up with what he believes is a solution.
He came up with a scheme for trying to trade off this gold, and it meant buying some gold in Jersey, and that would give him the documentation.
He wanted receipts for the gold bars, showing that he had purchased 11 bars, which were worth £100,000.
Have they got the receipts?
If anyone was stopped, they had receipts to say that they had purchased this gold and this gold was legal.
Noy places the gold he's just bought into a safety deposit box in Jersey and heads back to England carrying just the receipts. The plan is to use a gold and jewellery dealing company owned by a crooked businessman called John Palmer to sell the smelted down and disguised Brinx Mat gold on the open market, with the receipts making it look legit.
11 bars of smelted gold are delivered to them, complete with 11 receipts, which of course Kenneth Noy got from that bank in Jersey. Those receipts are then sent back to Noy so he can reuse them for another 11 ingots that he's planning to deliver to them later.
Noy hopes to reuse the 11 original receipts again and again, but his first transaction attracts unwanted attention.
The bank official dealing with Noy finds his behavior very suspicious, and the transaction itself is very unusual, so he decides to contact the police.
It's the second time that Noy's name has been linked with the stolen gold. The police are instantly on the case. This could be the only lead they have to retrieve the bullion worth tens of millions. It's now a year after the heist, and the 3 gang members already arrested, Robinson, White and McAvoy, are in court for the Brinx mat robbery. All 3 plead not guilty, but the prosecution have their key witness, inside man Tony Black.
He links the robbery to his own brother-in-law. He provides evidence that points them in the direction of Mad Mickey McAvoy, not to mention Tony White, the so-called King of Catford.
McAvoy and Robinson are sentenced to 25 years, but White gets off on a technicality and walks away a free man.
McAvoy has been sentenced, he's got 25 years in prison, and he's expecting a big pot of gold when he's released.
The police may have more convictions, but over a year after the Brinx mat raid, the stolen bullion is still out there.
Yes, all
Until
right.
they have enough evidence to nail Noy, the gold will continue to disappear as it's sold off through dodgy dealer John Palmer.
They're selling the gold back to some of the most respectable gold bullion dealers in the world.
Incredibly, the very dealers who lost gold in the robbery are buying it back. All the while, police are closely watching the only lead they have, hoping to get a break.
We're keeping our surveillance going on Kenneth Noy and the associates that we've seen coming and going from his address. We are confident that we're looking at the right people. It's just finding evidence to substantiate that.
14 months after the robbery, that break comes in the most tragic of circumstances, when an undercover surveillance team moves in for a closer look.
John Fordham and Neil Murphy went into the grounds of Kenneth Noy's property. Shortly afterwards, there was noises heard in the grounds, dogs barking. Neil Murphy came out over the back wall, calling for John to come out. Unfortunately, John didn't get out. He was confronted by Kenneth Noy and ended up dead.
John Fordham had been viciously stabbed 11 times.
This incident points out to you just how dangerous the people are you're dealing with, and that they will go to any lengths to save themselves, even if it means killing someone.
You're more determined than ever that these people were not going to get away with this. It was, it was such a horrendous thing, And personally, I thought, no way. I'm going to carry on until I get every one of them.
Noy is arrested and charged with murder, and a thorough search of his property reveals astonishing new evidence.
In a gully by the side of one of the garages, there was an old paint tin, and in the paint tin, there was 11 bars of gold.
Tests show the bars of gold are the same as the original Brinx mat bullion. The police team have their first solid evidence that Noy is linked to the robbery, but they're nowhere near locating the rest of the haul.
We're still nowhere near the £26 million worth of gold. We found 11 bars which are worth £100,000, so there's an awful long way to go.
Then, a few months after the brutal killing of the police officer, the Brinx Mat heist claims its second victim. The violence that has been the hallmark of both the crime and its investigation now reaches the criminal world.
It's May 1985, and a gunman walks into Georgie Francis's pub and tries to shoot him dead.
Known criminal George Francis has been one of those laundering the gold for the gang, but he'd let greed get the better of him.
George Francis was very lucky to escape the attempt on his life. And that was a warning sign to all those people that had been stealing gold under their noses.
This attack is the start of a decades-long war of greed, revenge, and paranoia over the gold.
So many people involved in laundering all the gold was a big mistake, because people were taking gold that didn't belong to them and stealing it off of villains, and it always ends in tears.
10 months after DC John Fordham's brutal murder, the police suffer a major and very personal blow when Kenneth Noy gets off on a plea of self-defense.
It was unbelievable. We were absolutely sure that this was going to be a guilty.
Thank you. It seems amazing that an unarmed man can be stabbed 11 times and a jury can find that that's a justifiable killing.
Stunned by the verdict, police are determined to make Noy pay, and he's immediately rearrested and tried, this time for being in possession of the 11 bars of stolen gold. 8 months later, Noy's trial ends.
Noy is jailed for 13 years and fined £250,000 for the bullion.
He screams at the jury, "I hope you all die of cancer."
There was some justice for the death of John Fordham, I think, more than anything else.
With Noy's conviction, the hunt for the gold is about to move in a new direction.
Our discovery of the gold in the smelted state has now sort of brought home to us that all the gold may well have been smelted.
If it's been smelted, then it's being laundered, and that means tracing it has become more difficult, as the police are now chasing cash, not gold.
It's just a case of tracking from the bank accounts where each deposit went, where it came from in the first place, and it just went in a vicious circle and went all over the place, very convoluted.
The problem for the police is that the money from the gold is being invested in schemes like the 80s Docklands property boom. And as these make a profit, the money is then mushrooming and mutating, making it virtually impossible to track. Almost 3 years after the robbery, the syndicate of Lloyd's insurers, frustrated by the lack of results, launches its own investigation in a bid to recoup the millions they paid out in the aftermath of the heist. The investigator chosen is Bob McCunn, and he has a very different approach to that of the police.
The police are concerned to ensure that criminals are put in prison. My job is different. I'm not after vengeance, so I'm not after prosecution. I'm simply after money.
By 1989, over 5 years after the robbery, the investigations, both criminal and civil, are still crawling on with few results. But then the death toll of those related to the Brinx Mat robbery starts to rise.
It's 1989, and accountant Terry Goodham and his girlfriend are both murdered and their bodies dumped in Epping Forest.
The rumours were that the pair had cheated people out of the proceeds from the laundered gold.
The message was put across quite clearly that if you steal from us, you will die.
With at least 3 people now dead and 1 seriously injured, the death toll continues to rise, and the police investigating the robbery begin to face a new challenge in recovering the haul.
Anybody involved with Brinx Mat who got substantial sums of money out of it would have been likely to have invested in drugs.
The rise of the drug ecstasy in Britain came about because a lot of the Brinx Mat cash was used and then invested in massive shipments of the drug.
We can see money being spent on drug habits. We could see money being invested in projects that were clearly scams. I mean, there are criminals who feed on criminals, and so we traced money in a number of cases that just disappeared into the sand.
While Brinx matte gold helps fuel the rise of ecstasy, almost 7 years after the heist, the gold's legacy of greed, betrayal and revenge is at the root of yet another gangland death. This time it's former great train robber Charlie Wilson, who's shot dead by a hitman in Spain.
There is a rumour that £3 million of Brinx matte cash is invested in a drugs deal that goes wrong, which had been run by former great train robber Charlie Wilson.
And the trail of murder and mayhem doesn't look like it's going to stop claiming more gangland victims anytime soon.
Greed has kicked in at all levels. Nobody trusts anybody, and that turns to violence. That's why some people have been killed.
Donald Urquhart is shot dead by a hired assassin as he leaves a pub in Marylebone, West London. He is alleged to be one of the gang's money launderers.
Away from the violence, insurance investigator Bob McCann manages to get a meeting with the main gold smelter, Kenneth Noy, when he's released from prison in the summer of 1994.
There was no suggestion that I was talking to a major criminal or anything. We just sat down, we talked about it. We simply wanted to recover the money as much as we could, as much as we economically could. Meeting Noy was an important stage in getting other people to talk.
For those who refuse to settle, Bob McCann has only one option: taking them to civil court, which, unlike criminal courts, needs a lot less evidence to get a conviction.
We start with 54 defendants. We settled with 52, leaving 2 people in respect of whom we have to have trials.
One of whom is Tony White, the alleged robber who got off a decade earlier.
Tony White had been acquitted on the criminal charge of being involved in the robbery. We nevertheless thought that we had a good case in the civil court. And after an interesting trial, the judge decided that he had been involved in the robbery and that we got a judgment against him. And I was very pleased, the police were very pleased. It was a good day.
12 years after the heist, yet more villains involved in laundering the gold are bumped off. 3 men are found shot dead in the Essex countryside. The stolen Brinx matte gold bullion is now responsible for 8 deaths. And there are more to come.
All these murders over this gold came about and it was put across like a warning shot to anyone that had taken money that didn't belong to them.
Renowned underworld figure Keith Headley is shot dead on his yacht in Corfu. Headley is rumoured to have been looking after some of that gold for the gang, but unfortunately it had gone missing. Getting rid of that gold is proving so stressful to a lot of the participants and their associates in the underworld that there is a feeding frenzy going on, and that death toll looks set to rise.
Violence surrounds the robbery and all those involved. Kenneth Noy has been out of prison for 2 years, and he's back in the headlines.
I hear on the radio that someone has been murdered on the M25 after an altercation with another driver. A young man by the name of Stephen Cameron. I spoke to the police in Kent who were dealing with the inquiry, but by that time they'd already realised who the suspect was, and they were looking for Kenneth Noy.
Just before I retired in 1993, I had to do a parole report on Noy, and I stated in that parole report that this man would undoubtedly kill again, and I was proved right.
In 1998, Noy is arrested for the road rage murder and finally jailed for life. But as one Brinx Mat gangster goes inside, others get out. After 16 years behind bars, Mad Mickey McAvoy and Brian Robinson are released. What will this mean for the cycle of death and destruction surrounding the Brinx Mat gold? It's now 16 years since over £26 million of gold bullion was stolen from the Brinx Mat depot near Heathrow. The stolen gold is already soaked in blood, and with robber Mad Mickey McAvoy now out of prison, it seems unlikely that the violence will end anytime soon.
He thought that when he come out, he's expecting a big, big amount of gold or cash. In prison, he would have been able to put the word around that if his money wasn't there, then there's going to be trouble.
And the trouble isn't long in coming.
It's 2001. Brian Perry gets out of his own car and is shot in broad daylight in Bermondsey, southeast London. This sends a shiver of fear through the underworld.
Brian Perry was a real smooth operator, and with handing the gold, he done a good job. But when McAvoy and Robertson got out, the gold wasn't there. So you could say that he's dug his own grave.
After almost 2 decades, the killings continue when George Francis, the criminal who survived an earlier attack, is gunned down at point-blank range outside his courier business in southeast London.
It's open warfare now, and everyone is fair game.
The ones who went to prison were expecting those that didn't go to prison to have disposed of it for them and have kept the cash for them. But, you know, if you're expecting thieves to do that, you're expecting too much.
Then in 2004, insurance investigator Bob McCann's 18-year mission to recoup the proceeds of the robbery finally comes to an end.
I think the total we recovered, it's over 27 million. It's like fishing in a very dark, deep pool. You only know what you get out. You've got no idea what might be swimming around in there. We think we got about between a half and 2/3 of the proceeds of the gold. There may be some more out there. We did certainly identify lots of money that disappeared, that couldn't be recovered.
The Brinx Mat villain's epic conversion of gold into cash brought more money into this country than any other crime in history. And even though police and Bob McCann have managed to get some of the gold and proceeds back, it's nothing compared to what is still out there.
We recovered about £18 million worth of it, but who knows what happened to the rest of it.
There may be some left, who knows?
I was given information from a very, very good source that the rest of the gold was buried and a swimming pool built over it so that no one could find it.
The lure of the gold and the greed and violence that surrounds it is still as powerful as ever.
Even today, a new generation of British gangsters are locked in battle with each other over the remaining gold. That they believe the gold still lies secreted in the lockups of South London and the fields of Kent.
But it isn't just the gold's lurid legacy that lives on. Although more than 30 years have passed since the fateful November morning when 6 armed robbers decided to take almost 3 tons of pure gold, the robbery's victims are still trying to come to terms with it.
Brinx Mat experience, for sure, changed me as a person. I think the fact that it's 32 years on and we're still talking about it, it stays with you, but you put it in a place where it doesn't bother you, or try not to bother you.
Even after all this time, the death toll doesn't look like ending.
A lot of people were involved in Brinx Mat, and a lot of wrong people. And as an old friend of my family said, you mix with dogs, you get fleas. And that's what's happened.
It seems like many of those involved in Brinx, Matt, are being picked off like targets at a funfair shooting range.
Nothing surprises me now that comes up, you know, which is allegedly linked to the Brinx Mat.
The robbery transformed not just Britain's criminal underworld, but the face of Britain itself.
The knock-on effect of the Brinx Mat robbery has spread its tentacles across all sorts of areas, hoping to unleash a tidal wave of illegal drugs and accompanying violence.
That spiral of violence linked to anyone involved with the Brinx Mat gold bullion robbery is still very much in evidence even today. In the summer of 2015, the heist claimed its latest victim, the man who sold Noyes smelted gold for him, John Palmer.
John Palmer had been crossing other criminals, ripping them off, and making hundreds of millions of pounds out of being a criminal.
He's made a lot of enemies of people that have been defrauded, people who have lost their savings, and he always seems to be living the life of Riley.
Only 4 people known to be directly involved with Brinx Mat haven't been cast in the gold shadow of death: McAvoy, Robinson, White, and Noy.
They've all survived the so-called curse of Brinx Mat, and no one knows why.
I think the killings will continue. I think there'll be arguments. There'll be people who think that one of their colleagues has been killed unnecessarily and they'll want revenge. No, this won't stop.
Since that fateful day in November 1983, more than 15 people connected with the Brinx Mat robbery have been killed or maimed, and few believe the violence has ended.